On the 24th of February, 1815, the lookout at Notre Dame de la Garde signaled the three-master, the Pharaon from Smyrna, Trieste, and Naples. As usual, a pilot put off immediately, and rounding the Chateau d'If, got on board the vessel between Cape Morzou and Rion Island. The ship drew on and had safely passed the strait and approached the harbor under topsail, jib, and spanker, but so slowly and sedately that the idlers, with the instinct which is the forerunner of evil, asked one another what misfortune could have happened on board. However, those experienced in navigation saw plainly that if an accident had occurred, it was not to the vessel herself, for she bore down on all the evidence of being skilfully handled, and standing by the side of the pilot, who was steering the Pharaon toward the narrow entrance of the inner port, was a young man who, with activity and vigilant eye, watched every motion of the ship and repeated each direction of the pilot. "Ah, is that you, Dantes?" cried the man in the skiff. "A great misfortune for me especially. Off Civitavecchia we lost our brave Captain Leclerc. Now, if you will come on board in Morel," said Dantes. He climbed up the side of the ship, while the young man, going to his task, left the conversation to Danglars. He was a man much disliked by the crew, as Edmonds was beloved by them. Darting Edmond a look. "You see," said Danglars, "he fancies himself already upon this my word." "And so, in fact, he is," said the owner. "He is young, it is true, but he seems to be a thorough seaman and full of experience." A cloud passed over Danglars' brow with hate. We will leave Danglars struggling with the demon of hatred and endeavoring to insinuate in the ear of the shipowner some evil suspicions against his comrade, and follow Dante, who rapidly ascended 4 flights of dark staircase, while with the other he repressed the beating of his heart, and paused before a half-open door from which he could see the whole of a small room. The room was occupied by Dante's father. "Oh, my dear Edmond, my boy, my son, no, but I did not expect you. Enjoy the surprise seeing you so suddenly. Ah, I feel as if I were going to die." "Come, tell me all the good fortune that has befallen you," said the young man. "The good Captain Leclerc is dead, father, and it is probable that, with the aid of Monsieur Morel, I shall have his place. Do you understand, father? Only imagine me a captain at 20 with 100 louis pay and a share of the profits. Is it not more than a poor sailor like me could have hoped for?" "Yes, my dear boy," replied the old man. "It is very fortunate." As Edmond passed, the black and bearded head of Calarose appeared in the door. He was a man of 25 or 26. "What, is it you, Edmond? Back again?" he said. "It seems you have come back rich, my boy," continued the tailor, looking askance at the handful of gold and silver which Dantes had thrown on the table. The young man remarked the greedy glance which shone in the eyes of his neighbor. "So much the better, so much the better. Nothing will give greater pleasure to all your old friends, and I know one down there behind the St. Nicholas Citadel who will not be sorry to hear it." "Mercedes," said the old man. "Mercedes is a very fine girl, and very fine girls never lack followers. She particularly has them by the dozens." "Really?" answered Edmonds, with a smile which had in it traces of slight uneasiness. "Come, come," said the sailor. "I have a better opinion than you of a woman in general, and of Mercedes in particular, and I am certain that, captain or not, she will remain ever faithful to me." "So much the better, so much the better," said Calarose. "But never mind that, my boy. Go and announce your arrival, and let her know all your hopes and prospects." "I will go directly," was Edmond's reply, and embracing his father and nodding to Calarose, he left the apartment. Calarose lingered for a moment. Then, taking leave of old Dantes, he went down to rejoin Danglars, who awaited him at the corner of Rue Senac. "Well," said Danglars, "did you see him?" "I have just left him," answered Calarose. "You do not like Dantes? I never like upstarts." Our readers will follow us along the only street of this little village, and enter with us one of the houses, which is sunburned to the beautiful dead leaf color particular to the building of the country, and within coated with whitewash like a Spanish posada. A young and beautiful girl, with hair as black as jet, her eyes as velvety as a gazelle's, was leaning with her back against the wainscot. At 3 paces from her, seated in a chair which he balanced on 2 legs, leaning his elbows on an old worm-eaten table, was a tall young man of 20 or 22, who was looking at her with an air in which vexation and uneasiness were mingled. He questioned her with his eyes, but the firm and steady gaze of the young girl controlled his look. Well, repeat it, I beg of you, that I may at last believe it. Tell me for the 100th time that you refuse my love, which had your mother's sanction. Make me understand once and for all you are trifling with my happiness, and my life or death are nothing to you. Ah, to have dreamed for 10 years of being your husband, Mercedes, and to lose that hope, which was the only stay of my existence. At least it was not I who ever encouraged you in the hope, Ferdinand, replied Mercedes. You cannot reproach me with the slightest coquetry. I have always said to you, I love you as a brother, but do not ask from me more than any sisterly affection, for my heart is another's. Is this not true, Ferdinand? I mean, Mercedes, that you are thus harsh and cruel with me, but because you are expecting someone who is thus attired, but perhaps he whom you await is inconstant. If he is not, the sea is so to him. Ferdinand, cried Mercedes, I believe you are good-hearted, and I was mistaken. Ferdinand, you are wicked to call your aid jealousy and anger of God. Yes, I will not deny it. I do await, and I do love him of whom you speak. To seek a quarrel with a man is a bad method of pleasing a woman who loves that man. No, Ferdinand, you will not thus give way to evil thoughts. Unable to have me for your wife, you will content yourself with having me for your friend and sister. And besides, I love Edmond Dantes, the young girl calmly replied, and none but Edmond shall ever be my husband. Ferdinand let fall his head like a defeated man, heaved a sigh that was like a groan, and then suddenly, looking her full in the face with clenched teeth and expanded nostrils, said, But if he is dead? If he is dead, I shall die too. Mercedes, called a joyous voice from without. Mercedes! Ah, exclaimed the young girl, blushing with delight, and fairly leaping in excess of love. You see, he has not forgotten me, for here he is. And rushing toward the door, she opened it, saying, Here, Edmond, here I am. Ferdinand, pale and trembling, drew back, like a traveller at the sight of a serpent, and fell into a chair beside him. Edmond and Mercedes were clasped in each other's arms. Their intense happiness isolated them from all the rest of the world, and they spoke in broken words, which were the tokens of a joy so extreme that they seemed rather the expression of sorrow. Suddenly Edmond saw the gloomy, pale, and threatening countenance of Ferdinand, as it was defined in the shadow. By a moment for which he could scarcely account to himself, the young Catalan placed his hand on the knife at his belt. I did not know when I came with such haste to you that I was to meet an enemy here, said Dantes. Oh, Ferdinand exclaimed, running furiously and tearing his hair. Oh, who will deliver me from this man? Wretched, wretched that I am. Hello, Catalan. Hello, Ferdinand. Where are you running to? Exclaimed a voice. The young man stopped suddenly, looked around him, and perceived Caderousse sitting at a table with Danglars under an arbor. Ah, moi foi! Under any circumstances, said Caderousse, who drank as he spoke, and on whom the fumes of the wine began to take effect. Under any circumstances, Ferdinand is not the only person put out by the fortunate arrival of Dantes. Is he, Danglars? Unquestionably, Edmond's star is in the ascent, and he will marry the splendid girl he will be captain to, and laugh at all of us, said Danglars, with a sinister smile passed over Danglars' lips. Unless I take a hand in the affair, he added, saying to Ferdinand, be sufficient that Dantes will not marry her you love. And the marriage may easily be thwarted, methinks, and yet Dantes need not die. Death alone can separate them, remarked Ferdinand. Absence severs as well as death, and if the wall of a prison were between Edmond and Mercedes, they would be effectually separated as if they lay under a tombstone. Well, you understand there is no need to kill him. The French have this superiority over the Spaniards, and the Spaniards ruminate while the French invent. Do you invent, then? Said Ferdinand patiently. Well, then, I should say, for instance, resumed Danglars, that if after a voyage such as Dante has just made, in which he touched at the island of Elba, someone were to denounce him to the king's procurer as a Bonapartist agent, be much better to take, as I now do, this pen, dip it into the ink, wrote with his left hand the following lines, which he handed to Ferdinand, which Ferdinand read in an undertone. The Honorable, the King's Attorney, is informed by a friend of the throne and religion that one Edmond Dantes, mate of the ship Pharaon, has been entrusted by Murat with a letter for the usurper, and by the usurper with a letter for the Bonapartist committee in Paris. Proof of this crime will be found on arresting him, for the letter will be found upon him, or at his father's, or in his cabin on board the Pharaon. Very good, resumed Danglars. Now your revenge looks like common sense. There is nothing to do now but fold the letter as I am doing, and write upon it, to the King's Attorney, and that is all settled. And Danglars wrote the address as he spoke. Yes, and that's all settled, exclaimed Calarose, who, by a last effort of intellect, had followed the reading of the letter, and instinctively comprehended all the misery which such a denunciation must entail. Ferdinand picked up the paper, and putting it in his pocket, then rushed out of the arbor toward Palan. The morning sun rose clear and resplendent, touching the foamy waves into a network of ruby-tinted light. The feast had been made ready on the second floor of La Reserve, with whose arbor the reader is already familiar. Dantes himself was simply but becomingly radiant with joy and happiness. A more perfect specimen of manly beauty could scarcely be imagined. Lovely as the Greek girls of Cyprus and Chios, Mercedes boasted the same bright, flashing eyes of jet and ripe, round, coral lips. She moved with delight. The delighted girls looked around her with a smile that seemed to say, "If you are my friends, rejoice with me, for I am very happy." Now, as 1:15 has already struck, I do not consider I have asserted too much in saying that in another hour and 30 minutes Mercedes will have become Madame Dantes. "Shall we not set forth?" asked the sweet silvery voice of Mercedes. To be sure, cried Dantes eagerly, quitting the table. "Let us go directly." His words re-echoed by the whole party with voracious cheers. At this moment Danglars' ear caught a sort of indistinct sound on the stairs. 3 blows were struck upon the panel of the door. The company looked at each other in consternation. "I demand admittance," said a loud voice outside the room, "in the name of the law." As no attempt was made to prevent it, the door was opened, and a magistrate wearing his official scarf presented himself, followed by 4 soldiers and a corporal. Uneasiness now yielded at the most extreme dread on the part of those present. "I am the bearer of an order of arrest, and although I most reluctantly perform the task assigned me, it must nevertheless be fulfilled. Who among the persons are assembled answers to the name Edmond Dantes?" "I am he." "What is your pleasure with me?" "Edmond Dantes," replied the magistrate. "I arrest you in the name of the law." "Me?" repeated Edmond Dantes, slightly changing color. "And wherefore, I pray?" Dantes descended the staircase, preceded by the magistrate and followed by the soldiers. A carriage awaited him in the door. He got in, followed by 2 soldiers and the magistrate, and the vehicle drove off toward Marseilles. "Adieu, adieu, dearest Edmond," cried Mercedes, stretching out her arms to him from the balcony. The prisoner heard the cry, which sounded like the sob of a broken heart, and leaning from the coach, he called out, "Goodbye, Mercedes. We shall soon meet again." Then the vehicle disappeared round one of the turnings of Fort St. Nicholas. "That I believe," answered Monsieur Morrel, "but still he is charged." "With what?" inquired the elder Dantes. "With being an agent of the Bonapartist faction. Many of our readers may be able to recollect how formidable such an accusation became in the period at which our story is dated. Gerard de la Fort was as happy a man as could be. Already rich, he held a high official situation. Though only 27, he was about to marry a young and charming woman, as become a deputy attorney of the king, and besides her personal attraction, which were very great, Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran's family possessed considerable political influence, which they would, of course, exert in his favor. "Bring in the prisoner." He sat down, grim and somber, at the desk. An instant after Dantes entered. He was pale but calm and collected, and saluted his judge with easy politeness. "Who and what are you?" demanded Villefort, turning over a pile of papers containing information relative to the prisoner. "My name is Edmond Dantes," replied the young man calmly. "I am a mate of the Pharaon, belonging to Monsieur Morrel and Sons." "Your age?" continued Villefort. 19, returned Dantes. What were you doing at the moment you were arrested? I was at the festival of my marriage, monsieur. And the young man, tell me on which point you desire information, and I will tell all I know only. He added, with a smile, I warn you, I know very little. It is reported your political opinions are extreme, said Villefort, who had never heard anything of the kind, but was not sorry to make the inquiry, as if it were an accusation. My political opinions, replied Dantes. Alas, sir, I never had any opinions. I am hardly 19. As Dante spoke, Villefort gazed at his ingenious and open countenance, besought his indulgence for him. With the deputy's knowledge of crime and criminals, every word the young man uttered convinced him more and more of his innocence. This lad, for he was scarcely a man, simple, natural, eloquent, with his eloquence of the heart never found when sought for, full of affection for everybody because he was happy, and because happiness renders even the wicked good, extended his affection even to the judge. Spite of Villefort's severe look and stern accent, Dante seemed full of kindness. Sir, said Villefort, have you any enemies, at least, that you know of? But you may have excited jealousy. You are about to become a captain at 19, an elevated post. You are about to marry a pretty girl who loves you, and these two pieces of good fortune may have excited the envy of some. You are right. You know men better than I do, and what you say may possibly be the case, I confess, but if such persons are among my acquaintances, I prefer not to know, because then I should be forced to hate them. Now, said the deputy, answer me frankly. What truth is there in the accusation contained in this anonymous letter? None at all, I will... Ah, said Villefort, this seems to me the truth. Go and rejoin your friends. I'm free then, sir? Cried Dantes joyfully. Yes, but first give me the letter. Stop a moment, said the deputy, as Dantes took his hat and gloves. To whom is it addressed? To Monsieur Noureddin, Rue Coq-Héron, Paris. Had a thunderbolt fallen into the room, Villefort could not have been more stupefied. He sank into his seat and hastily turned over the packet, drew forth the fatal letter, at which he glanced at the expression of terror. Yes, but you knew the name of the person to whom it was addressed, said Villefort. I was forced to read the address to know to whom to give it. Have you shown this letter to anyone? Asked Villefort, becoming still more pale. To no one, on my honor. And that was too much, far too much, murmured Villefort. Villefort's brow darkened more and more. His white lips and his clenched teeth filled Dantes with apprehension. After reading the letter, Villefort covered his face with his hands. Sir, he said, I am no longer able, as I had hoped, to restore you immediately to liberty. Before doing so, I must consult the trial at justice. What my own feeling is you already know. Listen, this is not a command, but advice I will give you. Speak, and I will follow your advice. I shall detain you until this evening in the Palais de Justice. Should anyone else interrogate you, say to him what you have said to me, but do not breathe a word of this letter. I promise. It was Villefort who seemed to entreat, and the prisoner who reassured him. You see, continued he, glancing toward the grate, where fragments of burned paper fluttered in the flames. The letter is destroyed. You and I are alone know of its existence. Should you therefore be questioned, deny all knowing of it. Deny it boldly, and you are saved. Villefort rang. A police agent entered. Villefort whispered some words in his ear, to which the officer replied by a motion of his head. Follow him, said Villefort to Dantes. Dantes saluted Villefort and retired. Hardly had the door closed when Villefort threw himself half fainting into the chair. Alas, alas, murmured he. If the procureur himself had been in Marseille, I should have been ruined. This accursed letter would have destroyed all my hopes. Oh, my father, must your past career always interfere with my successes? This will do, he said, and from this letter, which might have ruined me, I will make my fortune. Now to work I have at hand. And after having assured himself that the prisoner was gone, the deputy procureur hastened to the house of his betrothed. Dante was conducted to a tolerably neat chamber, but grated and barred, and its appearance therefore did not greatly alarm him. Besides, the word of Villefort, who seemed to interest himself so much, resounded still in his ears like a promise of freedom. Dante saw the glittering sabres and carbines of 4 gendarmes. He had advanced at first, but stopped at the sight of the display of force. Are you come to fetch me? He asked. Yes, replied a gendarme. In an instant he was placed in the stern sheets of the boat, between the gendarmes, while the officer stationed him at the bow. A shove sent the boat adrift, and 4 sturdy oarsmen impelled it rapidly toward the Palan. The boat continued her voyage. "Whither are you taking me?" he asked. "Look around you, then." Dantes rose and looked forward. "The Chateau d'Oeuf?" cried he. "What are you going there for?" The gendarme smiled. "I am not going there to be imprisoned," said Dantes. "It is only used for political prisoners. I have committed no crime. Are there any magistrates or judges at the Chateau d'Oeuf?" "There are only," said the gendarme, "a governor, a garrison, turnkeys, and good thick walls." "Here's your chamber for tonight," he said. Dantes followed him with his eyes and stretched forth his hand toward the open door, but the door closed. All his emotion then burst forth. He cast himself on the ground, weeping bitterly and asking himself what crime he had committed that he was thus punished. Dantes passed through all the stages of torture natural to prisoners in suspense. He was sustained at first by the pride of conscious innocence, which is the sequence to hope. Then he began to doubt his own innocence, which justified in some measure the governor's belief in his mental alienation, and then, relaxing his sentiment of pride, often before his captivity, Dante's mind had revolted at the idea of assemblages of prisoners, made up of thieves, vagabonds, and murderers. He now wished to be amongst them in order to see some face beside that of his jailer. He sighed for the galleys with the infamous costume, the chain, the brand on the shoulder. The galley slaves breathed the fresh air of heaven and saw each other. They were very happy. "Oh, my God, murmured he. My God, have pity on me, and do not let me die in despair." "Who talks of God in despair at this time?" said a voice that seemed to come from beneath the earth, and deadened by the distance, sounded hollow and spectral in the young man's ears. Edmund's hair stood on end, and he rose to his knees. "Ah," he said, "I hear a human voice." Edmund had not heard anyone speak save the jailer for 4 or 5 years, and a jailer is no man to a prisoner. He is a living door, a barrier of flesh and blood, adding strength to restraint of oak and iron. "In the name of heaven," cried Dante, "who are you?" "Who are you?" said the voice. "An unhappy prisoner," replied Dantes, who made no hesitation in answering. "Tell me, at least, who you are." The stranger smiled a melancholy smile. "I am Abbe Faria, and have been imprisoned, as you know, in the Chateau d'Oeuf since the year 1811. It was this. That was you had related to me all the particulars of your past life. You were perfectly unacquainted with mine. It has been long enough to inflict on me great and undeserved misfortune. I would fain fix the source of it on man, that I may no longer vent reproaches upon heaven." "Then you profess ignorance of the crime to which you are charged?" "I do indeed." "Come," said the abbé, closing his hiding place and pushing the bed back to its original situation. "Let me hear your story." Yes, replied Dantes eagerly. "I would beg of you, who see so completely the depths of things, and to whom the greatest mystery seems but an easy riddle, to explain to me how it was that I underwent no second examination, was never brought to trial, and, above all, was condemned without ever having had sentences passed upon me." "That is altogether a different, more serious matter," responded the abbé. "The ways of justice are frequently too dark and mysterious to be easily penetrated. All we have heretofore done in this matter has been child's play. If you wish me to enter upon the more difficult parts of the business, you must assist me by the most minute information on every point. There is," he said, at the end of Degasse's meditations, "a clever maxim which bears upon what I was saying to you some little while ago, and that is, that unless wicked ideas take root in a naturally depraved mind, human nature, in a right and wholesome state, revolts at crime. Still, from an artificial civilization have originated wants, vices, and false tastes, which occasionally become so powerful as to stifle within us all good feelings and ultimately to lead us to guilt and wickedness. From this view of things, then, comes the axiom that if you visit to discover the author of any bad action, seek first to discover the person to whom the perpetration of that bad action could be in any way advantageous. Now, to apply in your case, to whom Could your disappearance have been serviceable? Had a thunderbolt fallen at the feet of Dante's, or hell opened its yawning gulf before him, he could not have been more completely transfixed with horror than he had at the sound of these unexpected words. Starting up, he clasped his hands around his head, as though to prevent his very brain from bursting. I regret now, he said, having helped you in your late inquiries, or having given you the information I did. Why so? Inquired Dantes. Because it has instilled a new passion in your heart, that of vengeance.